We'll go ahead and get started. And Humant, can you talk us through what your journey is going like with this Microsoft Copilot agents?
Sure, be happy. Thank you, Nicole, and thank you all for taking time today. Again, Hemant Desai, CIO at ICMA, and I have my colleague Luke Ingram. He's also on the call today, so he'll tag team with me as and when to add some more context. But just to give you guys a quick backdrop, we so ICMA, we began our journey with working and kind of piloting with Microsoft Copilot about a little bit over a year ago now. We began with, as I'm sure some of you may be doing, a small group of people, in our case, just IT folks, beginning the pilot of use of Microsoft Copilot, see how it is, see the limitations. Of course, a year ago, Microsoft Copilot had a lot of limitations for obvious reasons. But more importantly, for us to know the ins and outs of using the Copilot before we open the floodgates. So about 8 months ago, after we did comprehensive tests within IT and some other stakeholders, we now have company-wide adoption of Copilot. So we are investing heavily in the Copilot product for many, many reasons. But one of the benefits that came about, so before I get to benefit, about 6 months ago, a major department in ICMA has been struggling with finding a knowledge management tool. Some of the tools we valued 2 years ago were too expensive for a small nonprofit such as ours to invest in, while the others lack the functionality of a true knowledge management system. Long story short, I'm glad we waited 2 years because as now with the LLMs and all of our repositories are entirely on SharePoint Farm. Now, our SharePoint farm is just like I'm sure most of you guys, it's a wild, wild west. There's stuff in there that should not be there. There's stuff in there that's 20 years ago, relevant, not relevant anymore, and everything in between those two extremes. So the challenge posed to us, Luke and I, is how can we leverage now that Copilot has the means to provide the content generation off of existing content, how can our research department use and leverage the tool to harness gigabytes of data and knowledge that's sitting in the SharePoint file? So we began exploring using the Copilot, the work version. So if I may share my screen, I want to show you where we began our journey from, and then quickly go into where we are now. And you all can let me know if you guys can see my screen. Are you able to see the screen that I'm right now on?
Yep, we see the Zoom logo.
Perfect.
Okay.
So when we bought Microsoft Copilot, and to go to Microsoft Copilot, you go to copilotmarket.com. They changed the whole URL to M365 Cloud. So the earliest version, which you still have, and they've updated that dramatically. Once you buy the enterprise license, you get the usual web, which is external facing, and then you get this tab, which is work, which is internal facing, where it allows us to search our document repository within ICMA. We can, work off our internal files, emails, so on and so forth. So we won't get into all those details, but we began using this and targeting one of the SharePoint folders as a knowledge source, right from the Copilot. Good news, bad news, right? It worked for some instances, but it hallucinated a lot because the Copilot, as it stands at the work version, is not able to put guardrails around content generation. So it starts looking at stuff that may not be relevant to the prompt. So which means we have to focus a lot more, which is not a bad thing, on prompt engineering. And Luke was helping in that journey. While we're doing that, and we're about to embrace what Dustin has shown us, how do we create, using Azure AI. So we're struggling between using Copilot versus Azure AI, and then in comes Microsoft about a month ago, Luke, saying, hey, guess what? We're releasing Copilot agents, right? Everything in the world is going to be running off of agents. And I'm sure you guys have already heard those hype stories, but for us, it's starting to become a little bit of a good reality. So I'm glad we waited this long to deploy a kind of a production version of the knowledge management. So now with the Copilot subscription, what we do have is on the right side, as you can see, if you can see my screen, it allows us to basically create our own agent, right?
Okay, I
So
can
I'm going to
jump.
show you how to create an agent shortly. But before that, let me show you what I did. So, as I'm an IT team member, and IT team at ICM is called TED, Technology, Engineering, and Data Team, right? So I'm my own ICM policy co-pilot. So this is a copilot I created which targets a specific SharePoint repository within ICMA that has all of ICMA's internal policies. One of them is a travel policy, so on and so forth, right? So you can ask any question off of this now a specific copilot. Say, what are some of the travel rules for business class travel? So what is ICMA's policy for business related, travel? And of course, it's a very generic question. And you're probably not going to ask this type of question. But what I'm trying to say is it actually look at only one repository, which is ICMS travel guideline. And so looking at 5 or 6 different folders and who knows how many versions of policy that other people may have stored in other folders. It only focused on the main document repository where HR and finance team wants us to look at, right? So now I can quickly do a document if I want to, but it gave me some basic, information based on my very generic looking prompt. So this is one amazing use case for me just creating my own agent and allowing me to target and harness the power of the agent to specific repository. So I'm going to show you 2 quick things and then I'm going to pause to kind of solicit some questions. So to create an agent, you just click on create an agent. It walks you through a step-by-step process. It gives you some guidelines if you want to, or I can click and configure. If I know what I want, I can just say for this demo, I just say Copilot test. Now this is important, and we are still looking at figuring out how to best leverage description. So the more you can describe what you're looking for from this Copilot, the more centered, or as Luke likes to call it, more contextual your responses will be based on your prompts, right? So less work you have to do on the back end or front end, if you would say from the end user side for prompt engineering. So as a creator, you might want to be a little more descriptive to describe your agent. Of course, I'm not going to say IT procurement,
And then right below that, you have the instructions tab, which
right?
is which you can kind of call a system prompt, where you're giving the models instructions for every prompt it's going to perform. And kind of while Hamit's filling that out, to explain a little bit more about the journey, our so the initial deployment of Copilot, as you guys all may know and we've talked about, it searches the entire Microsoft graph. So that's all of your teams, Outlook, email, everything. So whenever answering any question. And with that breadth of knowledge, it's struggled with its accuracy and its relevancy and its responses, especially in the resources where it would find, and in our wild west of a SharePoint, it would find old drafts. And trying to fix the process issue of cleaning up the SharePoint was a completely different problem than fixing our like making Copilot better. And so what Hemit's demonstrating here as well is they released 2 types of agents right before Christmas and the holidays. So this agent that he's bringing up here is like the Copilot Studio Agent Builder. And this is where you can target specific team sources. So when we go scroll down, you'll see the knowledge sources. You can put SharePoint URLs here, but however, this is the same limitation as the Copilot Studio Copilots, those custom Copilots we've talked about in the past, where they can only be a certain amount of levels deep. But this is really good for, okay, very small specific locations, SharePoint or your team's locations, and then they're held in this UI here, the Microsoft the 365 business chat. It's what it's called. And you see Hamit's got the knowledge sources up here. Uh, and then when we
Yes,
move,
okay.
hopefully we'll have time to move on to a different use case. And when we do, that's in SharePoint. I'll talk more then.
Yep. No, thank you. Thank you for adding that context. So I'm glad you mentioned the importance of the description and the instruction, because I just kind of cheated right now to not give too many, not spend too much time on that. But the more time you spend on that, the better you will be certainly in getting your information. But so this is where I've saved all of our technology artifacts, right? So all my technology procurement is in this folder. Everything that we have done since I've been here, for example. So instead of having me ask questions of my team members, or where are we, or how, when does the agreement expire, I can now basically target this folder and create my own Copilot in this case. And then, of course, I can provide more additional information, such as starter prompts. And this is, again, further narrowing down the need for prompt to be more specific. Because the more information you give upfront, the better your prompt response will be, as in anything else. One thing I will highlight is Microsoft does allow us to also, if you prefer, say, you know what, there are some things, like for example, a research team may prefer that not only do they want to search content within ICMA SharePoint, but when they're researching on, let's say, some policy work they might be doing, they might want to go on web and augment some of the content from SharePoint with some internet-based search too. So you can enable the web content also, but you can keep it all internal if you prefer. So once you're happy with the whole thing, you just say create, and just like that, without spending too much time, an end user such as me, who is not an IT person, has just created, and obviously in my case I am, but we are now slowly piloting that with one or two teams who are not even in IT to basically create their own Copilots. So here's an agent that I just created, and now everything I target the prompt here to is only for that one specific folder. And anything that's not in that folder, it'll basically not respond by saying, I'm sorry, I cannot find the information in the source it provided to us. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, Nicole, and see if anybody has any question before I let Luke show one more amazing way you can also harness Copilot agents.
Okay. Anybody have questions?
I do.
Yeah, go for it.
Is there a way of having access control on like individuals having access to different Copilot agents? So say I want to make sure that only behavioral health has access to a certain agent.
Yeah,
Is
when you see when Emmett clicked create, that window popped up with a link. It said, "Oh, only you can access this sharing preferences." Going to sharing preferences, you can there's several options you could do by security group. I don't believe you could do it with specific individuals. I think it's only by security group. Um, and then you can make it org wide, or if you have the right privileges, you can push it as a approved one to everyone's Copilot in your organization. Um, and then it generates links you can send and it installs into one of the options in their business chat app.
And that's a very good question. Also, as I'm sure you guys know, if you use Copilot within SharePoint, it does adhere to all of SharePoint's permission constraints. So even if I'm targeting a specific folder on, let's say, on SharePoint, which is where we have all of our repositories, if I'm not permitted to read content from a specific folder because of explicit permission, then the Microsoft Copilot agent will not look at that content when it responds to my prompt. But if Luke has access to that same content with the same exact Copilot agent, he will be able to harness information from that document or documents, if you will. So it does recognize SharePoint's permission hierarchy and limitations, constraints, I should say.
I have a question. Hemant and Luke, have you noticed if how it actually interacts with like videos and whether like if you have video in your SharePoint, can it do a very good summary of those videos?
So if it's like a video file, like an MP4, for example, um, if it's in SharePoint, I believe every video that's uploaded to SharePoint is uploaded to Microsoft Stream, which is then processed there, and that has a Copilot functionality built into that. So I think that Copilot ignores MP4 files, but if you have a transcript, it will read the transcript, like the text, and then answer based on that.
Right. And that's what I'm trying to assess out if whether or not the quality of that, because I mean, ultimately, Copilot is still using OpenAI's, model underneath. And I'm just curious as to whether or not the transcript that's being generated is actually of quality, because that's still kind of a thing that they're trying to figure out everywhere.
I've
Yeah, and
had some success, like in my day-to-day work, I've used meetings that we've had with consultants. I've uploaded videos into Microsoft Stream and pulled the transcripts and done the summaries. I'd say it's decent. Longer. Um, it's inconsistent. Let's say you want to, if you like a certain summary format,
No?
the odds of it's very difficult applying a specific format to its summary. It wants to summarize in one way, and then a different for each video. And if you specify a certain format, it might get lost information. I find it's okay.
It's okay.
Um,
Yeah,
I
that's
don't
generally
know.
what it is across the board. Yeah.
it is. I
And
think the word decent is the right word Luke used. It's not always very accurate. It does sometimes make up words that you didn't say in a meeting.
I haven't,
But most of the time it's
I've seen it more leaving things out, where often I find it's not covering things. Less so, sometimes it'll put things that weren't really covered. It might misdescribe things. I see often it'll be like 4 or 5 key points that just didn't find.
Mhm.
Um, and I have one use case I haven't tested. I think this is what you were asking before, is whether the agent will find a transcript and then answer like a question based on that. That's not something specifically I've tested, but I'm sure if it's like any other document, it might answer the same at the same level of accuracy.
Yeah. We've got another question that says, hey, what about scanned PDFs? Is it picking those up pretty well? I mean, I got to imagine a lot of it is, Microsoft to PDF if you do have PDFs, but any scanned PDFs use
Are
case?
they like OCR PDFs? Are they like images, as the pages are images? Are they text in the PDF?
How
I think
about
I think
answer for both?
Oh,
Because,
okay.
I mean,
Well,
because most,
images, like kind of unique situations with images where the cover will be an image and the rest will be text, and it won't receive any information on the cover. But that was more 365 and that custom Copilot we were making. I haven't like taken an agent and then directly tested an image PDF, but I'm assuming it's going to be about the same. If it's an image, when it's indexing, it just pulls the text from the PDFs, and it kind of ignores the images.
okay. Yari, did that answer your question?
It did, yes. Thank you.
Awesome.